thank you for watching YouTube Medical University. Once you have dementia, it's irreversible. If you think that way, today's lesson will dramatically change your life and your family's future. In fact, just by paying attention to a certain thing, about 40% of dementia cases can potentially be prevented. Such a shocking paper has been published. And this isn't just something from overseas. It's from a recent Japanese paper published in 2025 today. Based on this paper, I will reveal the top 4 causes of dementia that Japanese people should be most careful about. There are many causes that are surprisingly not well known, so please watch until the end. If you ignore your health checkup results without knowing this, your brain will gradually deteriorate. On the other hand, if you pay attention to these points, you can dramatically reduce your risk. So, let's get started. The top 4 dementia risks for Japanese people. Number 4 is social isolation. If you heard this and thought, I'm living alone, so does that mean I'm at risk? Don't worry. Living alone does not necessarily mean it's a bad thing. The problem isn't being alone. It's having little conversation with others and having no one to consult when you're in trouble. That's what social isolation means. When you hear about things that are good for dementia, most people probably think of food or supplements. But actually, connections with other people are the strongest nourishment for the brain, and this isn't just a matter of mindset. In a study conducted in the United Kingdom, a large-scale study involving 460,000 people found that those who were socially isolated had about 1.26 times higher risk of developing dementia compared to those who were not. And what's more, being lonely or socially isolated can actually shorten your lifespan. The impact is said to be as harmful to your body as smoking 15 cigarettes a day. The reason is simple. Having a conversation with someone is like doing a super complex brain workout. You read the other person's facial expressions, choose your words, recall past memories, and adjust your emotions. When you're chatting, you're doing all these tasks at full speed. In other words, being isolated means you're not able to do this full-speed brain workout. In fact, in my own clinic, there have been people who used to find purpose in their work, but after retiring, their opportunities to talk with others decreased dramatically. Some of them have told me that when they try to have a conversation, they just can't find the words anymore. But there is hope. In fact, there is data showing that even people like that have improved their brain's executive functions by increasing their social interactions. So, there are 3 things you can start doing today. The first is to make plans to meet with people. The second is to make an effort to have short conversations even if you don't have long talks. And the third is to have and maintain a role in society. The first point about making plans is that if you only meet people when you feel like it, you might end up putting it off because, honestly, people can be lazy and think it's too much trouble, maybe next time. So, after watching this video, make a conscious effort to reach out to a friend you haven't talked to in a while, call a relative, or make plans to have a meal with someone. Even if it's just 15 minutes once a week, please try to make plans. And for the second point, it doesn't have to be a long conversation. If you try to talk a lot with someone after a long time, you might get tired. For example, when taking out the trash, simply greeting your neighbors or mentioning the weather, like it's hot today, is enough. The third key point is having a role. Especially after retiring from work, your connection to society and your roles tend to decrease more and more. Even being in charge of taking out the trash is fine. Picking up and dropping off your family members is also good. In fact, there is also a correlation showing that people who manage volunteer activities have a lower risk of dementia than those who just participate in them. So taking on some kind of role is important. The top 4 dementia risk factors for Japanese people. Here is number 3. It's cholesterol. Actually, cholesterol alone ranks 3rd, but when you add a certain factor to it, it far surpasses the number 1 risk. Japan's biggest dementia risk comes to light. Actually, I've introduced the top 4 this time, but as for the 5th and 6th, number 5 is diabetes and number 6 is high blood pressure. In other words, cholesterol, diabetes, and high blood pressure are by no means separate diseases. Atherosclerosis, in other words, these are the 3 main diseases that gradually damage and hurt the walls of your blood vessels. So it's difficult to calculate simply, but if you add up the risks of these 3, their impact actually exceeds 10% and far surpasses the number 1 cause in this ranking. And we've also learned a lot about how cholesterol levels and blood sugar are related to the risk of dementia. In a study conducted in Korea with 1.8 million participants, it was found that people with higher low-density lipoprotein cholesterol had a higher risk of developing dementia in the future. And as for diabetes, a highly reliable meta-analysis involving 2.3 million people showed that the risk of dementia increased by about 1.73 times. Why does poor vascular health lead to dementia? Please try to imagine it. Think of the brain as a super high-performance computer. The blood vessels that supply nutrients to the brain are like the power cables for that computer. No matter how good the computer or the brain is, if the power cable is cut, electricity can't reach it. The same thing happens in the brain. Blood pressure, cholesterol, and blood sugar gradually damage the brain's power cables, its blood vessels, and this increases the risk of dementia. But there is also some hopeful research. It's called the Systolic Blood Pressure Intervention Trial Memory and Cognition in Decreased Hypertension Trial. In this study, about 9,300 people participated, and the group whose blood pressure was properly lowered had about a 20% lower risk of developing mild cognitive impairment, a condition just before dementia, compared to the group whose blood pressure was not lowered. In other words, if you protect your blood vessels, you can protect your brain, and the paper introduced at the beginning also talks about this kind of hope. Of all the dementia risks, if every Japanese citizen if everyone in Japan lived in a way that improved their dementia risk by even 10%, the number of dementia patients nationwide could be reduced by about 200,000. That's the equivalent of 4 Tokyo domes. This many cases of dementia are related to lifestyle habits. Just by reducing the risk of dementia by 10%, we can decrease the number of people with dementia by this much. So don't think it's hopeless just because you have high blood pressure or high cholesterol. Please check out the videos we've posted before on YouTube Medical University. It's never too late to begin. Check the description below or the card at the top right. At YouTube Medical University, we share the latest dementia information in an easy to understand way from doctors who care for these patients. I'd really appreciate it if you could subscribe to the channel before you forget which one it is. Now, let's move on and refocus on the top 4 dementia risk factors for Japanese people. Number 2 is this: lack of exercise. I'm sure this hits home for a lot of people. About 75.9% of Japanese people fall into this category of not getting enough exercise. Why is it ranked second? Research shows that people who are more physically active, just by that alone, have about a 26% lower risk of dementia. The reason is simple. Exercise has a positive effect on the causes of arteriosclerosis I mentioned earlier: blood pressure, blood sugar, and cholesterol. I believe that the best medicine that exists in this world is a prescription for exercise. When it comes to dementia, you might think it's all about brain training, but actually everyone already has a good computer, your brain itself. What's really important is keeping the power cables, your blood vessels, flexible and youthful. That's the most important thing. I've also released videos about exercise in the past. There are also programs where you can exercise together with me. Surprisingly, it's hearing loss. I think many of you might find that unexpected. In fact, one of the most overlooked causes is difficulty hearing. Even when your family members go to the hospital, there aren't that many cases where they actually consult the doctor about hearing loss, are there? While people focus on taking care of their blood vessels, they often forget to take care of their ears. 700,000 people. Even in large-scale studies involving hundreds of thousands of people, it has been found that those with hearing loss have about 1.6 times higher risk of dementia compared to those without. There are 3 main reasons for this. The first is brain fatigue, the second is lack of stimulation, and the third is isolation. That's the same as the 4th point I mentioned earlier. Let's go through them one by one. Brain fatigue occurs when hearing is difficult, causing you to use extra energy to understand speech. This leaves fewer resources for remembering or processing what you heard, making listening fatigue more likely. And the second point is that when it's hard to hear, conversations don't flow as easily, so the opportunities and time spent talking gradually decrease. That means you lose out on the brain training that comes from conversation. And the third point is isolation. As it becomes harder to hear and listening becomes more tiring, it becomes bothersome to meet people, which leads to the isolation I mentioned in the 4th point. And surprisingly, Japan is even called a developing country when it comes to hearing aids. Only about 15% of people with hearing loss actually use hearing aids. Just by having a hearing aid, you may be able to prevent the risk of dementia in the future more than anything else. So please don't ignore it if you feel your hearing is getting a little worse, and make sure to take care of your ears from a young age. So far, I've talked about prevention. Let me share one last important thing. Of course, it's important to protect your blood vessels and your ears, as I mentioned, but what I really want to talk about starts here. Earlier, I said that 40% of dementia can be prevented, but to put it another way, that means 60% can't be prevented. They are people who are learning, those with a high desire to learn. If you or someone around you develops dementia, it's not because of a lack of exercise or not trying hard enough. I don't want you to blame the people around you. As I mentioned earlier, more than half of the risk factors for dementia cannot be prevented. What does it mean that they can't be prevented? Simply getting older and living a long life is itself a risk factor for dementia, and there are also genetic factors involved. Individual effort can only achieve so much, about 40%. While preventing dementia is important, and I'll keep sharing information, it's just as crucial to build a society that accepts those with dementia and focuses on slowing its progression. If society has the attitude that developing dementia is the end, then when someone actually develops dementia, it becomes difficult for them to go out in public. If the people around you and society believe that it's okay even if you develop dementia, then even if your cognitive abilities decline a little, you can still live your life in your own way. There's a word called independence. Living alone without causing trouble for anyone. I think that's the image most people have. But in the latest disability studies, independence is defined like this. Independence isn't about not relying on others, but about expanding what or who you can rely on. For example, a person using a wheelchair faces a barrier if a building only has stairs, but a ramp or elevator removes that barrier. That person can move around on their own, and the barrier is removed. In other words, things like elevators and ramps, by having something to rely on, it appears as if that person is independent. It's exactly the same with dementia. Even if someone's cognitive abilities decline, not only having self-checkout machines, but also having a staff member nearby to help, or a workplace that understands their condition, having many sources of support like these. If society is like this, even if someone's cognitive abilities decline, they can still have a role and live within their community. This is sometimes called a dementia-friendly society. In Japan, spaces promoting these connections are growing. Known as dementia cafes, they welcome people with dementia, their families, and others. Even healthcare professionals can join and have tea together at these cafes. The term social prescription is also becoming more common, where instead of prescribing medicine, doctors prescribe connections with society. In fourth place, it's said that having a role is nourishment for the brain. Actually, the Japanese word ikigai is attracting a lot of attention around the world right now, and various studies are being conducted on it under the romanized term ikigai. There are even reports that having a sense of purpose or ikigai in life can slow down the decline of cognitive function. So what I want to tell everyone is that while taking care of your blood vessels and hearing is important, if you come across someone with dementia in town or find a place like an Orange Cafe or Dementia Cafe, don't see them as someone who needs your help. I hope you can interact with them calmly as partners in building our society. More sources of support make a person more independent. I would appreciate it if you could keep these words in the back of your mind. So this time, 40% of dementia risk can be reduced by individual habits, and the remaining 60% can be supported by the structure of society. When these two factors come together, I believe dementia will no longer be seen as a hopeless disease. I've also prepared a file that clearly summarizes the dementia risks from papers I couldn't introduce this time. It's designed so that even the general public can easily grasp the main points. If you register on the official line in the description and just type dementia, I'll send it to you for free, so please make use of it if you'd like. Also, I'd love to hear what you are conscious of in your daily habits and what you felt. I'd be happy if you could leave even a short comment in the comment section. Also, hitting the like button would really encourage me. Well then, see you in the next video. As a general practitioner, my patients have taught me how to age well from your 70s on. I want to live this way too. I didn't know it was possible. These stories share what I've learned, like whether chatting with friends beats exercise or when less medicine is better. These are lessons from my older patients. It offers advice for living healthily and happily at any age. Check it out in the description below.